Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my dangerous neighbor claims ownership of my house, insisting that God gave him the right. He ends up pointing a gun at me, demanding I hand over my property. Here is what happened. Let's dive right in. And the first story starts like this. While a lot of people consider their job something they just go to every day to make money and count the minutes until they go home, my job was a little bit different. I was the head of one of the marketing teams at a company and really loved doing my job. I think part of this really came down to the people and the environment I was working in. Starting with the people, there was nobody part of my team or above me in management that was a problem. There was no person in the office stealing lunches or not pulling their weight and making anybody suffer because of it. We were all extremely competent and worked seamlessly. Just to break down how a typical project would work, so I would get the assignment directly from my boss and I would take it to my team. Then it would be part of my job to delegate the roles to everybody, as well as making sure that I gave myself a fair share of the work as well. I'd also be the person picking up any slack when there was a tight deadline or just a lot of projects going on at the same time. Now, above me were essentially two people important to the story. There was my boss, who I guess would be the equivalent of a manager who handed out assignments to multiple departments. Then above him was the owner, who was the nicest man ever. He did not believe in cutting corners, which I think is why we never had unqualified but cheaper people working for the company. He was also the man who was extremely understanding when things just happened. One time I was sick with pneumonia and could not come into work for 2 weeks. For so many people this would mean getting fired or at the very least dock the pay. But what did the owner do? He sent me a card telling me to get better and personally kept an eye on my team for me. Everything started to go wrong with the company once the owner decided that his son needed to get his feet wet in the business. This guy was young and just got out of graduate school with no work experience to his name. My boss had been preparing for retirement for a couple of years, and the timeline just seemed to sync up perfectly with the son getting out of school. My boss retired and the owner's son took his place as my boss. Right away, I started to get a very weird and uncomfortable vibe coming off this guy. I'm a woman and many of the people working in the company are men. This includes my old boss and most members on my team. I never felt uncomfortable around any of them, which is another reason I love the environment. However, when the son started working at the office though, it was hard to not notice some things. He seemed to stare at many of the female workers, especially when their backs were turned and they were standing up. It's an immediate red flag if the new boss is looking at his workers' butts. Like every company, I think, in the entire country, we are forced to do a sexual harassment seminar every year and right when you are hired. I can only assume that he had to go through the same process and knew that what he was doing was wrong. Annoyingly enough, when his dad was around, he magically behaved, so he knew exactly what he was doing. The owner was getting older though and spending more days working from home than not. This meant that it was open season for his son to ogle the women in the building and make us uncomfortable. Things started to escalate only after a couple of weeks when he would start hanging around the women for no real reason. He would linger and stand way too close for comfort even when I would try and back away to create more distance. Since he was my direct boss, I was forced to deal with him more than anybody else on my team. In fact, I specifically told the two female members on my team to not go near him because I could see how uncomfortable they were. He had not done anything wrong yet, so I could not file a complaint. That was when the comments started. Boss, wow, I bet you look really good under that shirt. Boss, I need to take a trip to the bathroom after standing next to you. Boss, when you're looking to renegotiate your contract, remember to come find me and work something out. These were only ones directed to me and I was officially feeling harassed. All of these were done with a very creepy undertone and clear what his intentions were. I did exactly what those seminars teach us and went to HR to file an official complaint. I filled out the form saying what he did and hoped that it would get to the owner. I also advised the women under me to go to HR if he said anything to them. What I learned was that the harassment seemed to have stopped with all the other women except for me. I guess he decided that he liked me best and really thought this was the best way of showing it or something the like. I tried my best to avoid him, but it wasn't possible and I started to dread going into work. Seeing him and holding my breath that he acts like a professional and does not make these comments. Over the next month or so, I filled out probably a dozen HR reports about him, making comments or even trying to lay a hand on me when we were talking. I was always able to see his hand coming in and move out of the way in time. Nothing was getting done though, and I figured that nepotism was gonna win out and he was not getting fired. My contract was up in a year, and I told myself that if he was still my boss near the end, I was gonna find another job instead of renewing with this company. But then one day he came over to my desk while I was working, and the following conversation ensued. Boss, working hard as ever as I can see. I like a woman that knows how to work hard, if you know what I mean. Me, do you have a new project for me to bring to my team? Boss, no, I came over for something else. I've been watching you a long time and I know that you want me. You don't have to worry about getting in trouble because I'm gonna own the company in a few years anyway. So let's go out Friday night and I can show you a great time back at my apartment after. Me, no thank you. I'm trying to remain formal but dying on the inside and wanna just yell at him. To make matters worse, people around me can clearly hear what he is saying. Boss, oh come on, don't be like that. All uptight like a proper office woman. We all know everybody misses those days of a secretary sitting on their boss's lap, getting a nice bonus if you know what I mean. Me, I get what you're saying, I'm just not interested in seeing anybody right now. He waked off with almost a pout like a child, not getting what they wanted. He tried 2 more times that same week to ask me out with me, explaining that I was not interested. Even if he was not my boss, it was clear he was a misogynist that saw women as just objects for sex. I hoped that flat out rejecting him might deter him, but instead it just got him angry. Another couple weeks went by and I got an email saying that I was being terminated for inappropriate behavior and going against my contract. I had no idea what they were talking about as I read more into the report filed against me. According to the boss, I was inappropriate and trying to trade sex for favors for males in the office. That I also was taking unauthorized time off and pushing my work onto the other members of my team. Right at the bottom was the signature of my boss, who clearly made all of this up. I could not believe that somebody was so childish they would fire somebody for being rejected. I told my team what had happened and all of them were angry and complaining that none of that was true to me. I thanked them but told them I would not force them to go to HR in my defense if they did not want to get involved in this mess. To my joy, every single one of them went to HR to complain that everything in that letter was a lie and they had seen the boss harass me and ask me out multiple times. HR only has so much power though, so I was forced to go and get a lawyer to fight this. In the meantime, I was told I had to pack up my desk and go home. I think the saddest part was that he was gonna take over my role until they could hire a replacement, and I knew with 100% certainty he did not know how to do my job. He could barely do his own if I'm totally being honest. Half the things he gave to me were incomplete and needed me to go to a different department myself to ask them questions. Questions that he should have put in the report. Knowing that I got fired unfairly, I hired a lawyer and told him the entire story so far, also showing my contract and that I was not allowed to just be fired for no reason without being given a certain amount of money. It was only because I had made those complaints to HR that I had something I could use in court. Even my team members told me that if I went to court, they would be willing to testify. Again, they are amazing. The boss got served papers right in the office in front of everybody, and now I just had to wait until we could get a court date. While I was waiting for that, I was getting updates from my team about how massively broken the marketing department was with boss taking it over. I was just the first in a slew of like 10 people he decided to fire for no apparent reason. Some non-contract workers that couldn't do anything about it, but a few like me that had gotten a lawyer to try and fight it as well. Since he needed new staff, he decided to hire a bunch of his buddies from grad school that knew about as much as he did. They were just thrown into the role without training or experience and messing everything up. No projects were getting handed in by the deadlines, and when they did, they were always sent back for having major flaws. I also had been applying for new jobs and got one at a company doing similar work but at a lower level with a pay cut. Honestly, I really needed income, so I was willing to take anything in my area that I could get. It was not as good an environment as my last job, but at least my boss was not harassing me or asking me out. You might be wondering what happened to the owner while his son was doing all of this destruction to his company. He found out about all the firing he did and called me directly to try and get me back. I told him that I was not comfortable working under his son, that he can go look at the HR reports I filed and how nobody had done anything about them. I also told him to go and look at the reasons for my dismissal and tell me if it sounded anything like the person he knew. He called without even looking at things and was talking about forgiving me for mistakes I never made if I came back. To him, his son was perfect because when he was in the office, he transformed into the perfect gentleman. I can understand somebody not wanting to think their son did something bad, but that's not my problem. My court date finally arrived and I saw him for the first time since I packed up my desk and left the building. He looked as smug as ever, but I could see some changes in his face right away. He had bags under his eyes and was sweating. He was outwardly nervous, and I don't blame him because everybody going into this courtroom knew that I was gonna win. I found out that the other employees that sued him ended up taking a settlement because he didn't want to go to court. I was offered a settlement as well, which was about 6 months worth of salary. I refused it because I knew that taking it to court meant I was gonna get more. I was entitled to a year worth of pay based on my contract expiration date. He knew I was going in with all of the HR complaints, but he had no idea what else I had up my sleeve. I knew he was gonna say that the HR reports were just me overreacting and seeing something that was not there. That I was basically lying and he never did any of those things and barely even spoke to me. I pulled out written official witness testimony from about a dozen people that worked at the company. My entire team talked about it in their testimony that the boss was often lingering around my area and trying to talk to me whenever I was alone. That they overheard him speaking to me in a sexual manner and getting angry when I refused to go out with him. A couple even stated that once when it was just guys around, he complained about me being a tease and that he flat out wanted to have intercourse with me. I also had testimony from a couple other women saying that he flirted with them in the beginning too and went against the sexual harassment seminar that we were all required to take. His excuse was that he wasn't really paying attention during the videos they showed him and assumed it didn't apply to him. Also that he was not just any random employee but the future owner of the company, so he should set policy. It was like he didn't understand that sexual harassment was not a policy thing, but a legal thing. He got reprimanded by the judge and I was awarded the full year of pay that I was entitled to get. I did not feel satisfied though because of how worse off my life was at the new job compared to the old one. Only 3 months later the owner retired and the son took over the company. I wanted to make sure that he could not harass anybody else again, and the best way to do that was to make sure he did not have a business to run at all. I did 2 things to make sure that the company was gonna be run into the ground. The first thing I did was get in touch with a group that protested working conditions that hurt women. This included things like sexual harassment, and I knew from my old coworkers that he was still doing this. After this group got word from me about this a-hole, they started looking into the places that worked with our company and calling. They got so many people to pull out of working with this company after finding out the new owner sexually harassed women in the workplace. The amount of projects dropped so quickly that he didn't know what to do. Keep in mind, he barely knew how to do my job, let alone be the owner. The second thing I did was take out a loan to start my own company that would directly compete with this guy. My new job sucked anyway, so I figured I might as well do something big. I needed employees though, and I knew just where to get them. I got as many of my old coworkers as I could to do a mass walkout on him and come work for me. This only left him with his buddies that didn't know what they were doing either. Only a couple months later, the company went bankrupt. Meanwhile, for me, one of the female employees that left his company was the woman who did a lot of communication and got business contracts. So basically, she was able to get my company off the ground by picking up from the businesses that used to work with the old company. I'm still learning how to be an owner, but basing a lot of my choices on what the old owner would have done. It's a big team effort, but I think with the people I have, we can manage to do it. If you're curious about what happened to the sexist piece of work trash human, aka my former boss, he ended up in prison for sexual assault and he was never able to work in any official capacity again. And yeah, ripe stars, I am so happy that this guy can never hurt any employees again, and I wish OP all the success with her new company. Anyway, if you enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment because that would help me tremendously. And now let's move on to the actual title story. I know you've been waiting for a long time. It is titled, "Neighbor Points Gun at Me and Claims I Must Give Him My House. Insists that God told him he would get it for free." So for the past couple of years I've had issues with my neighbor. Nothing has ever been too drastic, but I'd be lying if I said I was not ever triggered by what he did. He would make numerous noise complaints to the police if I ever had more than 2 people around at my house, or even come around himself and bang on the door to the point where there is now dents in it. Best of all, however, was when he took it upon himself to bury a hole in my backyard when I was on holiday. I came back just as he was finishing said hole, and when I asked him what he was doing, he said he was burying his dead dog. I of course stopped him, although he did not really see an issue with what he was doing. So after 2 years of living there and with no sign of him moving out, I decided to move myself. I was not planning on staying in that house for too long anyway, it was more just until I got on my feet. I ended up getting a really good deal which covered the cost of the next house I bought and then some. My new house was much more modern than the other and was completely furnished when I moved in, so I really lucked out. The area surrounding it was also full of green space and the crime rates were low. I moved quickly and my neighbor was not home at the time I did said move. I know I probably shouldn't have, but I decided to write a quick petty letter to him, ranting about how unwelcoming and unfriendly he was, hoping that he would be more hospitable to the next neighbor. This turned out to work against me, as it meant he very quickly knew I had moved and I thought it wouldn't matter because how would he find me, right? But I was wrong, because a week after I moved he turned up at my door. "What on earth are you doing here?" I asked, astonished to see him at my front door. "I've come for the keys to your house," he stated, looking confused as to why I was querying him. "What?" I asked, genuinely puzzled, as I knew I did not sell him the house, so… "The keys," he repeated. "I did not sell you the house, I sold it to…" I began before being abruptly cut off. "You sold your house," he screamed. "Yes, what else would I do with it?" I questioned with a laugh, which by the look on his face made him even angrier. "You're supposed to give it to me," he screamed once more. At this point, I burst out laughing. I had literally no clue what he was on about and why he thought he deserved my house. "Okay, that was funny. Now please leave my property," I said once I had recovered. "I'm not joking. I had a vision in which I was told I would be getting your house," he stated, slamming his foot down on the ground. "Okay, sure," I replied and then slammed the door in his face. He spent the next half an hour banging on the door, but eventually he seemed to give up and get back in his car to go home. I'll admit I was fairly off-put that he now knew where I lived, but I figured he would not do anything too crazy. Also, I should note, at this point I had not handed the keys to the new owner, so luckily for them, my neighbor had time to cool down before greeting his new neighbors. For the next couple of days, I heard nothing from this neighbor and hoped that I heard the end of him, alas, nothing is ever that easy. "This is the police, open up," I heard, followed by banging on my door. I dashed over to the door and opened it, only to be barged past by an officer who claimed to have a warrant to search my house. Another officer was right behind him, ready to cuff me. "Hey, what's going on?" I demanded as my hands were squeezed into the cuffs. "We have received an urgent call that you are operating an illegal drug production at this address," the officer, who was about to begin ransacking through all of my belongings, stated. "Wait, what? That's ridiculous. Where did this suspicion come from?" I questioned. The officer stayed silent and I decided to let them carry on what they were doing. They would learn soon enough that there was nothing to find. "Nothing," the officer searched my house stated after 2 hours. The other uncuffed me as she began explaining what had happened. "We got a call from your previous neighbor that you were producing illegal narcotics. Given the call was clearly false, we are under oath to give the details." I was then handed a sheet of paper with a transcript of the call, as well as the name of the called and address. It all definitely matched up to my last neighbor. "Thanks for your time and I'm sorry for the hassle," one of the officers stated before standing up and leaving with the other. "No worries," I replied, but inside I was seething. How could he make such a life-ending allegation like that, all because I did not give him my house for free? At that point, I could only hope they were on their way to his house to set him straight. Alas, once more, my luck was not coming through, as another 2 days later I heard banging on my door again. "Give me the keys," my neighbor demanded when I opened the door. "Listen, I'm not just gonna give you a free house and I've already sold it. I cannot give you the keys if I meant to give them to someone else," I stated, getting wary from all of this nonsense. "So you still have the keys?" he asked and then barged past me. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I yelled as he ran upstairs and slammed the door to one of the rooms. I knew I kept the keys downstairs, but I still was not comfortable with him strolling freely around my house. "Get out of my house before I call the police," I yelled through the door that he had locked from the inside. I could hear him rummaging around inside, which made me fairly uneasy. "Police? That seems a little extreme," he replied. I laughed. "Extreme? You're the one who made a false allegation against me that I was hosting a drug production." I did not hear anything from him after that and decided I would just call the cops, but right before I did, he stormed past me and went straight out of my house. He was not gone for long, however, as within 10 minutes he was back banging on my door once more. "I had a vision and I need this house. It's my right. God told me so," he stated. His eyes were red like he had been crying. "Listen mate, you clearly need some help. Let me call someone for you." I was starting to get worried about him. He did not say another word after that, but he did do something which made my heart skip a beat. He raised up a gun, aiming it right towards my head. "Wow, watch what you are doing," I stammered, putting my hands above my head. "I'll kill you if you don't give me the deeds to your old property and the key," he yelled, shaking the gun. I stayed silent, waiting and hoping he would get closer, and he did. And the moment he was close enough, I grabbed the gun straight out of his hands and punched him square in the jaw. He was out cold. I phoned the police and told them everything that had happened, also warning them that I was holding his gun. They arrived and took the gun, as well as lifting my previous neighbor and putting him in a cop car. They allowed me to show them the footage from the cameras I had installed and took my full statement. Flash forward a couple of weeks and he had been charged with attempted murder, harassment and been placed in a mental health institute for a very long time. I hope by the time he gets out I will be gone long from here and that he doesn't track me down. However, I now know not to be so hopeful. And here, Ripe Stars, honestly, this is such a sad story. I feel so bad for OP, but I also hope that the neighbor gets the help that he clearly needs. Mental health issues can be so serious, as evident in this story. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.